A Debt of Two Hearts. Paris, 1919. Isabelle Mercier discovered a silver locket on a quiet riverside bench that, when opened, revealed a tiny portrait and the inscription "Always Remember," signed by Corporal Lucien Fournier, igniting a search for lost memories. Chapter 1. The Whisper on the Seine. The Seine, even in the muted grays of a late Parisian November, held a certain melancholic beauty. Isabelle Mercier, bundled in a worn wool coat that had seen better days, sat on a weathered wooden bench, the chill seeping through her thin gloves. The war had ended a year ago, officially, but Paris still wore its scars like a faded, tattered dress, buildings pockmarked with shrapnel wounds, streets quieter than they should be, and a pervasive sense of loss hanging heavy in the air. Isabelle herself was a reflection of that loss. Her fiancé, Jean-Luc, had perished in the trenches of Verdun, leaving a void in her heart that felt as vast and echoing as the nave of Notre Dame. She came to this particular bench almost every day. It offered a sliver of peace, a momentary escape from the cramped apartment she shared with her widowed mother and younger sister, Emily. The rhythmic lapping of the river against the stone embankment soothed her frayed nerves, a counterpoint to the constant hum of grief that vibrated within her. Today, however, the peace was disturbed. Something glinted in the dim light, nestled between the wooden slats of the bench. Curiosity, a rare and welcome guest these days, stirred within her. She reached down, her fingers brushing against something cold and smooth. It was a locket, silver, tarnished with age, but still retaining a hint of its former elegance. An intricate design of interwoven leaves and vines adorned its surface. It was surprisingly heavy, solid, a piece of craftsmanship that spoke of a time before the war had consumed everything in its path. Isabelle hesitated. Picking up a lost object felt intrusive, like peering into someone else's private sorrow. And sorrow, she knew, was something Paris had in abundance. But the locket seemed to pulse with a silent plea, a yearning to be found, to be opened. Her fingers, almost of their own volition, fumbled with the tiny clasp. It sprang open with a soft click, revealing two miniature portraits inside. One was of a woman, young, with luminous eyes and a gentle smile that hinted at a spirit not yet broken by the world. Her hair was piled high in the fashion of a few years past, a single strand escaping to curl around her delicate cheek. The other portrait stole Isabelle's breath. It was a man, a soldier, in the uniform of the French army. He was young, impossibly young, with a face that blended boyish charm with a hint of steeliness in his jawline. His eyes, even in the faded sepia tones of the miniature, held a depth of emotion that resonated across the years. There was a hint of sadness there, a shadow of what he had seen, but also a fierce determination, a spark of life that refused to be extinguished. Beneath the portrait, a tiny inscription, etched in elegant script. "Always remember. Corporal Lucien Fournier." The name meant nothing to Isabelle. She searched her memory, sifting through the countless names of soldiers she had heard, the faces she had seen in the newspapers, the lists of casualties that had become a grim, daily ritual during the war. But Lucien Fournier, the name evoked no recognition. She closed the locket, the silver cool against her palm. The inscription, "Always remember," echoed in her mind. Remember what? Remember whom? Was it a message to the woman in the other portrait? A lover? A sister? A wife? The questions swirled around her, unsettling, yet strangely compelling. The wind picked up, whipping strands of her dark hair across her face. The Seine, no longer peaceful, churned with a restless energy. Isabelle felt a sudden, inexplicable connection to this unknown soldier, this Corporal Lucien Fournier. It was as if the locket itself were a conduit, a link to a past that was both foreign and intimately familiar. The war had taken so much, stolen so many futures. But perhaps, just perhaps, this locket held a story that deserved to be told, a memory that deserved to be resurrected. She tucked the locket into her coat pocket, the weight of it a tangible reminder of the mystery she now held. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the riverbank. The streetlights flickered on, their pale glow illuminating the empty spaces where buildings had once stood. Isabel rose from the bench, a newfound purpose stirring within her. She would find out who Corporal Lucien Fournier was. She would uncover the story behind the locket, and in doing so, perhaps, she would find a way to navigate her own grief, to piece together the shattered fragments of her own life. The river whispered secrets as she walked away, secrets she was now determined to uncover, one whispered clue at a time. She did not know where to even begin, the task feeling more monumental than any she had ever before conceived. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Lost Battalion. The next morning, Isabel awoke with a renewed sense of purpose, a stark contrast to the heavy lethargy that had become her constant companion. The locket, resting on her bedside table, seemed to radiate a faint energy, a silent summons. She dressed quickly, the familiar routine of preparing breakfast for her mother and sister a grounding ritual in the face of the unknown. Emily, still young and resilient, chattered about school and friends, her words a fleeting balm on Isabel's lingering sadness. Her mother, however, remained shrouded in a quiet grief, her eyes reflecting the same profound loss that haunted Isabel. After breakfast, Isabel excused herself, claiming she needed to visit the market. Instead, she found herself drawn to the Archives Nationales, a vast repository of historical documents and records. The building itself was imposing, a monument to France's long and often turbulent past. The air inside was thick with the scent of old paper and dust, a scent that both intimidated and intrigued her. She approached a librarian, a stern-looking woman with spectacles perched on her nose. "I'm trying to find information about a soldier," Isabel explained, her voice hesitant. "Corporal Lucien Fournier. He served during the war." The librarian raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something that might have been sympathy in her eyes. "The war," she sighed, the word heavy with unspoken sorrow. "So many young men. Do you have any other information? A regiment number? A date of birth?" Isabel shook her head. "Only what was in the locket. Always remember." She felt a blush creep up her cheeks. It sounded so insubstantial. The librarian, however, didn't dismiss her. She led Isabel to a vast reading room, lined with towering shelves filled with bound volumes and overflowing file boxes. "The records are extensive," she said, a slight understatement. "You can start with the casualty lists, but they are organized by regiment. Without that, it will be like searching for a single grain of sand on a beach." Isabel spent hours poring over the records, her eyes burning, her head aching. The sheer scale of the loss was overwhelming. Page after page of names, each one representing a life cut short, a family shattered. She found several Lucien Fourniers, but none that seemed to fit the young man in the locket. Some were too old, others too young. Some had died in the early years of the war, others had survived. None were listed as a corporal. Discouraged, she was about to give up when she stumbled upon a section dedicated to the lost battalions. These were units that had been cut off from their main forces, surrounded by the enemy, often with devastating consequences. The stories within these records were harrowing, tales of bravery, desperation, and unimaginable suffering. One entry caught her eye: the 74th Infantry Regiment, Lost Battalion, Argonne Forest, October 1918. The Argonne Forest. The name sent a shiver down her spine. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the war, a brutal, grinding fight that had claimed countless lives. She scanned the list of names associated with the 74th. There, halfway down the page, was a Lucien Fournier corporal. No further details were given, only a note: "Missing, presumed dead." Missing, presumed dead. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. But Isabel felt a flicker of hope. Missing. It wasn't a definitive death sentence. There was still a chance, however slim, that he had survived. That he had been taken prisoner, perhaps. Or that he had simply disappeared. She copied down the information, her hand trembling. The 74th Infantry Regiment. The Argonne Forest. October 1918. These were the clues she had, the thread she would follow. She thanked the librarian, who offered a small, encouraging smile. As Isabel left the archives, the Parisian sky was darkening, the first drops of rain beginning to fall. The city felt different now, cloaked in a deeper layer of mystery. The locket, tucked safely in her pocket, felt warm against her skin. It was no longer just a beautiful object, it was a link to a man lost in the shadows of war, a man she was determined to find, even if all that remained of him were whispers and memories in the falling rain. She had a regiment, a location, and a date. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and her heart held on to that small spark of hope. She had a place to begin, and a name to follow, into the heart of a forgotten battlefield. Chapter 3. The Baker's Secret. The following days were a blur of research and inquiries. Isabel visited military offices, veterans associations, and even the local newspaper, hoping to find someone who remembered Corporal Lucien Fournier or the 74th Infantry Regiment. She encountered a mixture of indifference, pity, and occasional bursts of helpfulness. Most people, however, were simply too weary, too burdened by their own losses to offer much assistance. The war had left a collective trauma, a wound that refused to heal. One afternoon, while walking through her neighborhood, she noticed a small bakery, its windows fogged with the warmth of freshly baked bread. The aroma, a comforting blend of yeast and sugar, drew her in. The bakery was run by an elderly man named Monsieur Dubois, his face lined with wrinkles that spoke of a life lived fully, a life that had undoubtedly witnessed its share of hardship. He had a kind smile, and his eyes held a gentle wisdom that put Isabel at ease. While purchasing a loaf of bread, Isabel decided to take a chance. Monsieur Dubois, she began hesitantly, have you ever heard of the 74th Infantry Regiment? Or a soldier named Lucien Fournier? Monsieur Dubois paused, his hands, dusted with flour, stilling on the counter. He looked at Isabel, his gaze piercing, yet gentle. The 74th, he repeated, his voice low. Yes, I knew some men from the 74th. My son, Jean-Pierre, was in that regiment. Isabel's heart skipped a beat. Was he in the Argonne Forest, in October of 1918? Monsieur Dubois nodded slowly, his eyes clouding over with a distant sorrow. He was. He didn't come back. Isabel felt a pang of sympathy for the old man, a shared understanding of the profound grief that lingered in the aftermath of war. I'm so sorry, Monsieur Dubois, she said softly. I found a locket with a picture of a Corporal Lucien Fournier. He was in the 74th. Monsieur Dubois's eyes widened slightly. Lucien? Little Lucien? He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He was a good lad. Always cheerful, even in the worst of times. He and Jean-Pierre were friends. They looked out for each other. He paused, his gaze drifting towards the back of the bakery, where a faded photograph hung on the wall. It showed a group of young soldiers, smiling and posing for the camera, their faces full of youthful bravado. Monsieur Dubois pointed to a young man in the back row, his arms slung around another soldier's shoulder. That's Jean-Pierre, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And that's Lucien, next to him. Isabel looked closely at the photograph. It was the same man from the locket, though here he looked even younger, his eyes full of a carefree joy that had been extinguished in the later portrait. Do you know anything about him? Isabel asked, her voice barely a whisper. Anything about what happened to him in the Argonne? Monsieur Dubois hesitated. He looked around the bakery, as if checking for eavesdroppers, even though they were alone. There were rumors, he said finally, his voice low and conspiratorial. Rumors that some of the men from the 74th didn't die in the battle. That they escaped. That they were helped by someone on the other side. Isabel frowned. On the other side? You mean a German? Monsieur Dubois nodded. It was just a rumor, mind you. But Jean-Pierre, he wrote me a letter, a few weeks before the battle. He said he had met someone, a German woman. A nurse. He said she was different. That she didn't believe in the war. He stopped, his gaze fixed on Isabel's face. I never told anyone about this, he said, his voice trembling. It would have been dangerous. Treasonous even. But if Lucien was with Jean-Pierre, maybe she helped them both. Isabel felt a surge of excitement. mixed with a healthy dose of skepticism. It sounded like a story from a romantic novel, not the brutal reality of war. But the sincerity in Monsieur Dubois's eyes, the desperation in his voice, convinced her that he believed it to be true. He had held on to this secret for over a year, clinging to the hope that his son might still be alive. "Do you have the letter?" Isabelle asked. Monsieur Dubois shook his head. "I burned it. After I got the news about Jean-Pierre. I was afraid of what they would do if they found it." He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "But I remember what he wrote. He said her name was Elsa Schmidt. He said she worked at a field hospital near the front lines. Elsa Schmidt. A German nurse. A potential savior." Isabelle felt a renewed sense of determination. This was a lead, a fragile thread, but a lead nonetheless. She thanked Monsieur Dubois, promising to keep his secret, and left the bakery, the scent of bread now mixed with the scent of hope and the weight of a baker's carefully guarded secret. The rain had stopped, and a sliver of sunlight peeked through the clouds, illuminating the cobblestone streets. The locket, once again, pulsed with a silent energy, urging her forward, guiding her towards a truth that lay hidden in the heart of a war-torn landscape, and perhaps in the heart of a German nurse named Elsa. The quest had taken a very unexpected turn. Chapter 4. Echoes in Montmartre. Armed with the name Elsa Schmidt, Isabelle felt a renewed surge of hope, though she knew the task ahead remained daunting. Finding a single German nurse in the vast, chaotic aftermath of the war was akin to searching for a specific raindrop in a storm. She decided to start by focusing on the artistic community of Montmartre. During the war, Montmartre had been a haven for artists, writers, and musicians, many of whom had served as ambulance drivers, stretcher-bearers, or even spies. It was a place of hidden connections, whispered secrets, and unconventional alliances. Isabelle frequented the cafes and bistros, showing the locket to anyone who would look. She described Lucien Fournier, his youthful face, his corporal's uniform, and the inscription, "Always remember." She spoke of the 74th Infantry Regiment, the Lost Battalion, and the rumors of a German nurse named Elsa Schmidt. Most people shook their heads, offering apologies or vague expressions of sympathy. The war had touched everyone, leaving a trail of broken dreams and shattered lives. Some, however, offered snippets of information, fragments of memories that slowly began to paint a picture of Lucien Fournier's life before the Argonne. She learned that he had been a talented artist, sketching portraits in charcoal and capturing the fleeting beauty of Parisian life. He had frequented a small café called Le Chat Noir, a gathering place for artists and bohemians. The owner, a woman named Madame Sophie, remembered him well. "Lucien," she said, her eyes softening with a nostalgic smile. "He had a gift. He could capture the soul of a person with just a few strokes of his charcoal. He drew me once a long time ago." She led Isabelle to a back room, where a dusty, forgotten portrait hung on the wall. It was a sketch of Madame Sophie, younger, her eyes full of a vibrant energy. The signature in the corner was unmistakably Lucien's. He was in love, Madame Sophie confided, her voice low. With a girl dancer. She performed at the Moulin Rouge. Her name was Annalise. Annalise. Another name, another piece of the puzzle. Isabelle felt a pang of something. Jealousy? Curiosity? It was difficult to say. She was piecing together the life of a man she had never met, a man who had loved and been loved, a man who had left behind a trail of broken hearts and unfinished dreams. Madame Sophie didn't know what had become of Annalise. "She disappeared," she said, shrugging sadly. "Many people did during the war. Some fled the city. Others, well, who knows?" Isabelle continued her search, visiting the Moulin Rouge, showing the locket to the dancers and staff. Most were too young to remember Lucien or Annalise, but one elderly woman, a former costume mistress, recalled Annalise vaguely. "She was beautiful," the woman said, her voice raspy with age. "And she was troubled. She had secrets, I think. She was involved with someone important. Someone dangerous." The woman refused to elaborate, her eyes darting nervously around the room. It was a long time ago, she muttered. Best to let the past stay buried. Isabel left the Moulin Rouge feeling frustrated and intrigued. Annalise was clearly a key figure in Lucien's life, but she was also shrouded in mystery. Was she the woman in the locket? Was she the reason for the inscription, "Always remember"? And what was the dangerous secret she had carried? As Isabel walked back towards her apartment, the Parisian night enveloped her, the city lights casting long, distorted shadows. The echoes of Montmartre, the whispers of artists and dancers, swirled around her, creating a sense of both excitement and unease. She had found more pieces of Lucien's life, but the picture remained incomplete, fragmented, like a shattered mirror reflecting a distorted image of the past. And the biggest question, about the German nurse, Elsa Schmidt, remained stubbornly unanswered. Still, a name, Annalise, offered a different potential path, a new mystery to unravel in her quest. She clutched the locket, drawing strength. Chapter 5. The Widow's Warning. The next day, Isabel decided to pursue the lead about Annalise, the dancer from the Moulin Rouge. She returned to Montmartre, determined to find someone who knew more about Annalise's disappearance and the dangerous secret she supposedly carried. She revisited the cafes and bistros, asking questions, showing the locket, but she encountered mostly dead ends. People were reluctant to talk, their memories clouded by time and a lingering fear of the past. Frustrated, Isabel decided to try a different approach. She remembered the elderly costume mistress at the Moulin Rouge, the woman who had hinted at Annalise's secrets. Isabel found the woman's address in an old employee directory and, with a mix of trepidation and determination, decided to pay her a visit. The woman, whose name was Madame Dubois, no relation to the baker, lived in a small, cramped apartment in a quiet side street. She was initially reluctant to let Isabel in, her eyes filled with suspicion. But Isabel persisted, explaining her quest to uncover the story behind the locket and her belief that Annalise might hold a key to Lucien Fournier's fate. Finally, Madame Dubois relented, inviting Isabel inside. The apartment was dimly lit, filled with dusty furniture and faded photographs. The air was thick with the scent of mothballs and old memories. "Annalise," Madame Dubois said, her voice shaking slightly. She was a troubled soul. Beautiful, yes, but haunted. She hesitated, her gaze drifting towards a framed photograph on a nearby table. It showed a young woman, strikingly beautiful, with dark eyes and a mischievous smile. It was Annalise. She was involved with a German officer, Madame Dubois said finally, her voice barely a whisper. A high-ranking officer. He was powerful and ruthless. Isabel's heart sank. A German officer. This was a dangerous path, a forbidden love that could have had devastating consequences. Did Lucien know? Isabel asked. Madame Dubois nodded. He knew. He tried to warn her. He told her to leave him, to get away from Paris. But she wouldn't listen. She was infatuated. Or perhaps afraid. Afraid? Of the officer? Perhaps. Or perhaps of something else. She never said. But I saw it in her eyes. Fear. And desperation. Madame Dubois recounted how Annalise had disappeared suddenly, just before the armistice. No one knew where she had gone. Some said she had fled with the German officer. Others said she had been killed, either by the resistance or by the officer himself. There were rumors, Madame Dubois said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Rumors that she was a spy, that she was working for the French or perhaps for the Germans. No one knew for sure. Isabel felt a chill run down her spine. A spy. This added another layer of complexity to the story, another layer of danger. Do you think she knew Elsa Schmidt? Isabel asked, remembering the baker's story about the German nurse. Madame Dubois shook her head. I don't know. I never heard that name. But it's possible. Annalise had many contacts, many secrets. She looked at Isabel, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and warning. Be careful, child, she said. This is a dangerous path you're following. Some secrets are best left buried. The war, it left scars on everyone. And some wounds they never heal. Isabel thanked Madame Du Bois for her time, her heart heavy with a newfound sense of foreboding. The widow's warning echoed in her ears, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurked beneath the surface of this seemingly simple quest. She was no longer just searching for a lost soldier, she was delving into a world of espionage, forbidden love, and wartime betrayals. The locket, tucked safely in her pocket, felt heavier than ever, a burden of secrets and unanswered questions. The romantic image of a soldier's love was rapidly dissolving into the much murkier world of wartime secrets, making every discovery not a relief, but a deepening of dread. As she walked away, she wondered who she could trust. Chapter 6. Letters from the Front. Despite the widow's warning, Isabel's resolve remained unshaken. The more she learned about Lucien Fournier, the more determined she became to uncover the truth, no matter how dangerous or complex it might be. She realized that to understand Lucien's fate, she needed to understand his life during the war, his experiences in the trenches, and his relationships with the people around him. She decided to return to the Archives Nationales, hoping to find more information about the 74th Infantry Regiment and, if possible, any personal records belonging to Lucien Fournier. This time, she approached a different librarian, a younger man who seemed more sympathetic to her quest. "I'm looking for anything you have on the 74th Infantry Regiment," Isabel explained, particularly any letters, diaries, or personal accounts from soldiers who served in the Argonne Forest. The librarian nodded understandingly. "We have a significant collection of personal correspondence from the war," he said. "It's not fully catalogued, unfortunately, but I can show you where to start." He led her to a section of the archives filled with boxes of unsorted letters, most of them tied together with faded ribbons or string. The sheer volume of material was daunting, but Isabel felt a surge of hope. Somewhere within these boxes, she might find a clue, a whisper from Lucien himself. She spent days immersed in the letters, reading the words of soldiers who had experienced the horrors of the trenches firsthand. The letters were a mixture of mundane details about daily life, expressions of longing for home, and harrowing accounts of battle. Many were filled with fear, despair, and a profound sense of loss. As she read, Isabel began to feel a closer connection to Lucien, to understand the world he had inhabited, the challenges he had faced. She learned about the camaraderie of the soldiers, the bonds forged in the face of unimaginable adversity. She also learned about the constant fear, the ever-present threat of death, and the psychological toll that the war had taken on even the strongest of men. After several days of searching, she finally found a small bundle of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting on the top envelope was elegant and precise, unmistakably the same script as the inscription in the locket. The letters were addressed to Mademoiselle Annelise Dubois at an address in Montmartre. It was Lucien's handwriting. Isabel's heart pounded in her chest. These were letters from Lucien to Annelise, the dancer, the woman he had loved. She carefully untied the ribbon and began to read. The letters were filled with a passionate, almost desperate love. Lucien wrote about his longing for Annelise, his dreams of a future together after the war. He described the beauty of Paris, the cafes, the music, the life they would share. He also wrote about the horrors of the war, the fear, the death, the constant struggle for survival. In one letter, he mentioned the rumors of a German nurse. "There is a woman here," he wrote, "a German, but she is not like the others. She tends to the wounded with compassion, regardless of their uniform. Jean-Pierre says she is an angel. I am not sure, but I see kindness in her eyes." This was the first concrete connection between Lucien and Elsa Schmidt. It was a fleeting mention, but it confirmed the baker's story and placed both individuals near the same location at the same time. In another letter, he wrote about his growing unease about Annelise's relationship with a German officer. "I fear for you, my love," he wrote. "This man is dangerous. He is not what he seems. Please be careful." His final letter, written just days before the Battle of the Argonne Forest, was filled with a sense of foreboding. "I have a bad feeling about this, Annelise," he wrote. "I fear I may not see you again. But know this, my love, I will always remember you. Always. Isabel closed the letter, her eyes filled with tears. The inscription in the locket, "Always remember," was a direct quote from his last letter to Annalise. It was a promise, a vow, a testament to his enduring love. She carefully placed the letters back in their bundle, tying the ribbons securely. She had found a treasure trove of information, a glimpse into Lucien's heart and soul. But she also knew that she was only scratching the surface. The letters raised more questions than they answered. What had happened to Annalise? What was the truth about her relationship with the German officer? And what was the fate of Lucien Fournier in the Argonne forest? The letters were a powerful emotional connection to the past, but also a haunting reminder of the incomplete story. She felt closer to Lucien than ever, the letters a physical representation of the life that he had lived. She closed her eyes and envisioned him writing, penning the words with care and urgency. Chapter 7. The Hospital of Broken Souls. The mention of Elsa Schmidt, the German nurse, in Lucien's letters solidified Isabel's conviction that this woman held a crucial piece of the puzzle. She decided to shift her focus from Paris and concentrate on finding information about field hospitals operating near the Argonne forest during the war. This proved to be a challenging task. Records of German medical facilities were scarce, scattered, and often incomplete. The French authorities had little interest in preserving the history of their enemies' wartime operations. Isabel visited military archives, Red Cross offices, and even contacted several historical societies, but her efforts yielded little fruit. Just as she was beginning to lose hope, she stumbled upon a small, obscure organization dedicated to preserving the history of wartime medical care. The organization was run by a group of volunteer historians, most of them elderly veterans or their descendants. They had amassed a surprisingly large collection of documents, photographs, and personal accounts relating to both Allied and German medical units. The director of the organization, a frail but sharp-witted woman named Madame Moreau, listened to Isabel's story with interest. Elsa Schmidt, she repeated, her brow furrowed in thought. The name sounds familiar, but I can't quite place it. She led Isabel to a back room, filled with shelves of dusty files and boxes. We have a section dedicated to German field hospitals, she explained. It's not well organized, I'm afraid, but you're welcome to look through it. Isabel spent hours poring over the records, her eyes scanning lists of names, medical reports, and supply inventories. The sheer scale of the medical operation was staggering. Thousands of wounded soldiers, both French and German, had passed through these hospitals, their lives hanging in the balance. Just when she was about to give up, she found a file labeled Field Hospital 42, Argonne Sector, October 1918. Her heart skipped a beat. This was the right location, the right time. She carefully opened the file, her hands trembling. Inside, she found a roster of medical personnel, listing their names, ranks, and specialties. And there, halfway down the page, was the name she had been searching for, Elsa Schmidt, nurse. Isabel felt a surge of triumph. She had found her. Elsa Schmidt was real, and she had been working at a field hospital near the Argonne forest during the battle. The file contained little other information about Elsa, only a brief note indicating that she had been transferred to Field Hospital 42 from another unit in September 1918. There was no mention of her subsequent fate, no indication of whether she had survived the war. However, the file also contained several reports and letters written by the hospital's commanding officer, a German doctor named Wilhelm Hauser. Isabel scanned the documents, hoping to find some mention of Elsa, some clue about her personality or her actions. In one letter, Dr. Hauser wrote about the challenges of operating a field hospital so close to the front lines. He described the constant shelling, the overwhelming number of casualties, and the shortage of supplies. He also mentioned the dedication and bravery of his staff, singling out one nurse for particular praise. Nurse Schmidt, he wrote, is a remarkable young woman. She is tireless, compassionate, and utterly fearless. She has a calming presence that soothes even the most traumatized patients. She is a true asset to our unit. This brief description resonated with Isabel. It confirmed what Lucien and Jean-Pierre had said about Elsa, her kindness, her compassion. It painted a picture of a woman who had defied the hatred and violence of war, who had cared for the wounded regardless of their nationality. Isabel copied down the information, her mind racing. She had found Elsa Schmidt, but she still needed to find out what had happened to her after the war. Had she returned to Germany? Had she survived? And, most importantly, had she helped Lucien Fournier and Jean-Pierre Dubois escape from the Argonne forest? The hospital records confirmed Elsa's existence and her proximity to Lucien, but the mystery of her actions and her potential involvement in his escape remained tantalizingly unsolved. It was a major breakthrough with many leads. She needed to go to Argonne. Chapter 8. A Dance of Ghosts. The journey to the Argonne forest was a somber one. Isabel traveled by train, the landscape outside her window a blur of green fields and rolling hills. But as she approached the former battle zone, the scenery began to change. The fields were scarred with trenches, the forests pockmarked with shell craters, the villages reduced to rubble. The war had ended, but its physical and emotional wounds remained deeply etched on the landscape. Isabel had arranged to meet with a local historian, Monsieur Leclerc, who specialized in the history of the Argonne forest battle. He was a gruff, taciturn man, his face weathered by years of exposure to the elements, his eyes reflecting a deep understanding of the region's tragic past. Monsieur Leclerc met her at the small train station in a battered old jeep. He drove her through the forest, pointing out the key battle sites, the remnants of trenches, and the countless memorials and cemeteries that dotted the landscape. The sheer scale of the devastation was overwhelming. The Argonne forest, he said, his voice heavy with sorrow, was a meat grinder. Thousands of men, French and German, died here. It was a brutal, senseless battle. He showed her the location of the Lost Battalion, a small, isolated pocket of forest where the 74th Infantry Regiment had been surrounded and cut off from their main forces. The area was still heavily wooded, the trees bearing the scars of shrapnel and bullet holes. They held out for days, Monsieur Leclerc explained, against overwhelming odds. They were running out of food, water, and ammunition. Many were wounded or dying, but they refused to surrender. Isabel felt a chill run down her spine. She could almost hear the echoes of the battle, the screams of the wounded, the roar of the artillery. She imagined Lucien Fournier, trapped in this hellish landscape, fighting for his life, clinging to the hope of seeing Annalise again. Monsieur Leclerc then drove her to the site of Field Hospital 42, or what remained of it. The hospital had been destroyed during the battle, leaving only a few crumbling foundations and scattered debris. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood. "This is where Elsa Schmidt worked," Isabel said, her voice barely a whisper. Monsieur Leclerc nodded. "It was a dangerous place," he said. The hospital was constantly shelled. Many of the staff were killed or wounded. He pointed to a small, overgrown clearing nearby. "There was a makeshift cemetery here," he explained, "for the patients who died, and for some of the staff." Isabel walked over to the clearing, her heart pounding in her chest. She searched among the weeds and wildflowers, looking for any sign of a grave, a marker, a name. But there was nothing. The cemetery had been abandoned, forgotten, swallowed up by the forest. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Isabel felt a profound sense of sadness, a sense of the futility of war, the senseless loss of life. She had come to the Argonne forest seeking answers, but she had found only more questions, more ghosts. Monsieur Leclerc, sensing her despair, suggested they visit a nearby village, where a small museum had been established to commemorate the battle. The museum contained artifacts, photographs, and personal accounts from soldiers who had fought in the Argonne. As Isabel wandered through the museum, she came across a display dedicated to the medical personnel who had served in the region. And there, among the photographs of doctors and nurses, she saw a familiar face. It was Elsa Schmidt. The photograph was small and faded, but it was unmistakably her. She was younger than Isabel had imagined, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and compassion. She was wearing a Red Cross armband, and she was standing next to a group of wounded soldiers. Beneath the photograph, a caption read, Elsa Schmidt, nurse, Field Hospital 42. Missing, presumed dead, November 1918. Missing, presumed dead. The same words that had been used to describe Lucien Fournier. Isabel felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of grief and hope. Elsa, like Lucien, had disappeared in the final days of the war. Had they disappeared together? Had they escaped the Argonne forest, only to meet some other, unknown fate? That evening, staying in a small, quiet inn in the village, Isabel felt a strange sense of peace. She was surrounded by the ghosts of the past, by the memories of the men and women who had fought and died in the Argonne forest. The museum, with its artifacts and stories, felt like a nexus of all the loose threads of the narrative, and with Elsa's photograph, she felt as if she were on the cusp of understanding, even if it was a tragic revelation. She wasn't ready to give up. She looked at the locket and traced Lucien's face. She whispered, "I'll find you both." Chapter 9. The Spy's Confession. The revelation that Elsa Schmidt was also listed as missing, presumed dead, spurred Isabel to delve deeper into the chaotic final days of the war. She returned to Paris, determined to find any record, any witness, any clue that might shed light on Elsa and Lucien's disappearance. She revisited the military archives, the Red Cross offices, and the organization dedicated to wartime medical care, but this time, she focused her search on the period immediately following the armistice, the time of confusion and transition when many soldiers and civilians went missing. She discovered that the aftermath of the war was a time of widespread displacement, with millions of people uprooted from their homes, searching for lost loved ones, or simply trying to survive. Records were incomplete, communication was disrupted, and many people simply vanished without a trace. Isabel also revisited Madame Dubois, the costume mistress from the Moulin Rouge, hoping to glean any further information about Anneliese and her connections to the German officer. Madame Dubois was initially reluctant to talk, her fear of the past still palpable. But Isabel persisted, convincing her that she was close to uncovering the truth, and that Anneliese might hold the key to Lucien and Elsa's fate. Finally, Madame Dubois revealed a crucial piece of information. Anneliese, she said, her voice trembling, was not just a dancer. She was a courier. She carried messages for the resistance. And for the Germans. Isabel was stunned. Anneliese had been a double agent, playing a dangerous game of deception and betrayal. She was recruited by a man named Renard. Madame Dubois continued. He was a leader in the resistance, but he was also working for the Germans. He used Anneliese to pass information to both sides. Renard, the Fox, a fitting code name for a man who had lived in the shadows, manipulating both sides for his own gain. Do you know what happened to him? Isabel asked. Madame Dubois shook her head. He disappeared after the war. Some say he was killed by the resistance, others say he escaped to South America. No one knows for sure. But Madame Dubois did know one more thing. Anneliese, she said, had a meeting with Renard on the night of November 10th, 1918. The night before the armistice. She told me she was going to deliver a message that would change everything. Isabel's mind raced. November 10th, 1918. The day before the armistice. The day before Lucien and Elsa disappeared. Could Anneliese's meeting with Renard be connected to their disappearance? Isabel decided to search for any records relating to Renard, the double agent. She scoured the archives, looking for any mention of his name, any clue to his activities. After days of searching, she found a file in the intelligence archives, a heavily redacted document detailing the investigation into Renard's activities. The file revealed that Renard had been suspected of treason, but the investigation had been abruptly halted after the armistice. The reason for the halt was classified, but Isabel could guess why. Renard had been too valuable, too well-connected, to be brought to justice. He had likely made deals with both sides, ensuring his own survival. The file also contained a list of Renard's known associates, including Anneliese Dubois. And, to Isabel's astonishment, there was another name on the list, Dr. Wilhelm Hauser, the commanding officer of Field Hospital 42. Dr. Hauser, the man who had praised Elsa Schmidt's dedication and compassion. He had also been working with Renard, the double agent. Isabel felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the connection she had been searching for. Dr. Hauser, Renard, Anneliese, Lucien, and Elsa were all linked, their fates intertwined in the final, chaotic days of the war. Driven by a desperate need for closure, and at her wit's end, Isabella decides to confess all that she has discovered. She confesses that her heart is now filled with a love for Lucien, to her own mother. Her mother is shocked, and then, to Isabella's great surprise, confesses to a secret of her own. That, while working for the Red Cross in Paris during the war, she just once assisted a known resistance operative to deliver medications to an address that she later discovered was a safe house. She recalled the name of the operative. She had never forgotten it. Renard. Chapter 10. The General's Deception. Isabel's mother's confession, though shocking, provided a crucial link in the chain of events. The realization that her own mother had unknowingly interacted with Renard, the double agent, brought the war, and its intricate web of secrets, much closer to home. It also fueled Isabel's determination to uncover the truth, no matter how painful or dangerous it might be. Isabel and her mother spent hours poring over her mother's memories of that single encounter with Renard. She remembered the address of the safe house, a nondescript building in a quiet neighborhood near the Bastille. She remembered the code word Renard had used, liberté, and the sense of urgency and secrecy that had surrounded the delivery. Isabel decided to visit the address, hoping to find some clue, some remnant of Renard's presence. The building was now an apartment building, its facade renovated, its past seemingly erased. But Isabel persisted, knocking on doors, asking questions, showing the locket to the older residents. Most people shook their heads, offering no help. But one elderly woman, who had lived in the building for decades, remembered something. There was a commotion, she said, her voice hesitant. During the war. A raid, I think. The police, or perhaps the Gestapo. They took someone away. A man and a woman. The woman couldn't remember any details, only the sense of fear and chaos that had permeated the building. But her words confirmed Isabel's suspicion that the safe house had been compromised, that Renard's operation had been exposed. Isabel returned to the intelligence archives, determined to find out more about the raid on the safe house and the fate of the people who had been taken away. She searched through the records of police raids, Gestapo arrests, and resistance activities, but she found nothing that specifically mentioned the safe house or Renard. Just as she was about to give up, she stumbled upon a file classified as top secret, a document that had been sealed for decades. The file detailed an investigation into a high-ranking French general, General Dubois again, no relation to either the baker or the costume maker, who had been suspected of collaborating with the Germans. Isabel's heart pounded in her chest. A French general. This was a far more significant level of betrayal than she had ever imagined. The file revealed that General Dubois had been providing the Germans with sensitive military information, including troop movements, battle plans, and intelligence reports. He had been doing so for years, motivated by a combination of greed and ideological sympathy for the German cause. The investigation into General Dubois had been led by a small, secretive unit within French intelligence. The unit had gathered overwhelming evidence of the general's guilt, but they had been unable to arrest him. He was too powerful, too well-connected, and he had the protection of influential figures within the French government. The file also contained a shocking revelation. General Dubois had been in contact with Renard, the double agent. Renard had been acting as a go-between, passing information between the general and the German high command. And there was one more crucial detail. General Dubois had ordered the raid on the safe house on November 10, 1918. He had learned that Renard was planning to betray him, to expose his collaboration to the Allies. He had sent his men to silence Renard and anyone else who knew the truth. Isabel felt a wave of nausea. General Dubois had been responsible for the disappearance of Anneliese, and possibly Lucien and Elsa as well. He had used his power and influence to cover up his crimes, to bury the truth beneath a mountain of lies and deception. He had been a traitor, responsible for the death of his fellow countrymen. Isabel now knew what the message that would change everything was, that Anneliese had planned on delivering that night. She now knew that Renard had planned on exposing General Dubois to prevent greater betrayal, or as a last resort. And she knew that all of the players in this drama were potentially connected to that event.
But how?
And where did that leave Lucien and Elsa? She was running out of places to search. Chapter 11. Beneath the Scars. The revelation of General Dubois's treachery and his connection to Renard, Annalise, and potentially Lucien and Elsa left Isabelle reeling. She had uncovered a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the French military, a web of deceit that had cost countless lives and shattered the very foundations of trust and loyalty. She knew that General Dubois was the key to understanding what had happened to Lucien and Elsa. He had ordered the raid on the safe house. He had likely known about their escape from the Argonne forest, and he had the power to silence anyone who threatened to expose his crimes. But how could she prove it? General Dubois was long dead, his secrets buried with him. The investigation into his activities had been abruptly halted, the files sealed, the truth suppressed. Isabelle felt a surge of frustration, a sense of the injustice that had permeated the aftermath of the war. She decided to take a different approach. Instead of focusing on official records and documents, she decided to search for personal accounts, for witnesses who might have known General Dubois, who might have seen something, heard something, that could shed light on his actions. She began by contacting former members of the intelligence unit that had investigated General Dubois. Most were dead or unwilling to talk, their memories clouded by time and a lingering fear of reprisal. But one former agent, an elderly man named Monsieur Bernard, agreed to meet with her. Monsieur Bernard lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of Paris, his life reduced to a collection of faded photographs and bittersweet memories. He was initially hesitant to talk, his eyes filled with a weary sadness. But Isabelle persisted, convincing him that she was close to uncovering the truth, and that his testimony could help bring closure to a long-buried injustice. Finally, Monsieur Bernard relented. He told Isabelle about the investigation into General Dubois, the overwhelming evidence of his guilt, and the frustration of being unable to bring him to justice. He was a monster, Monsieur Bernard said, his voice trembling with anger. He betrayed his country. He betrayed his men. He betrayed everything he stood for. He also revealed a crucial detail. General Dubois had a personal aide, a young officer named Captain Laurent, who had been fiercely loyal to him. Captain Laurent had been present at many of the general's meetings, he had carried out his orders, and he had likely known the full extent of his treachery. Captain Laurent, Monsieur Bernard said, disappeared after the war. Some say he fled to South America. Others say he was killed by the general's enemies. No one knows for sure. Isabelle's heart skipped a beat. Captain Laurent, another potential witness, another piece of the puzzle. She decided to search for any records relating to Captain Laurent, hoping to find some trace of his whereabouts, some clue to his fate. She scoured the military archives, the immigration records, and even the Interpol databases, but she found nothing. Captain Laurent had vanished without a trace. Just as she was about to give up, she remembered something Monsieur Bernard had said. Captain Laurent was a collector. He collected souvenirs from the war. Isabelle had an idea. She contacted several antique dealers, specializing in military memorabilia, describing Captain Laurent and asking if they had ever encountered any items that might have belonged to him. One dealer, a man named Monsieur Dubois, no relation to previous individuals of this surname, responded. He said he had recently acquired a collection of wartime artifacts from an anonymous seller. The collection included a French officer's uniform, several medals, and a small, locked diary. The uniform bore the insignia of a captain, and the initials CL were embroidered on the inside pocket. Isabelle's heart pounded in her chest. This could be it. This could be Captain Laurent's diary. She arranged to meet with Monsieur Dubois, her hands trembling with anticipation. The dealer showed her the collection, and Isabelle immediately recognized the uniform as belonging to a French officer of Captain Laurent's rank. She examined the diary, a small, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. The lock was broken, and the diary was open. Isabelle began to read, her eyes scanning the handwritten entries. The diary detailed Captain Lawrence's experiences during the war, his observations of General Du Bois, and his growing unease about the general's actions. In one entry, Captain Lawrence wrote about the raid on the safe house. He described the scene, the chaos, the arrest of Anneliese and Renard. And he mentioned two other people who had been present at the safe house, a French corporal and a German nurse. Lucien and Elsa. Captain Lawrence wrote that he had been ordered by General Du Bois to eliminate them, to make them disappear. But he had hesitated. He had seen the fear in their eyes, the desperation in their pleas. He had known that they were innocent, that they were victims of the general's treachery. He had made a decision that had changed everything. He discovered that the general had planned on having them killed, whether or not they had crucial information. It was to be certain that the information never reached Allied High Command. Isabel held her breath, the diary feeling like a live wire in her hands. She had to know what came next. What had this captain done? Chapter 12. The reunion that wasn't. Isabel turned the page of Captain Lawrence's diary, her heart pounding in her chest, her fingers trembling with a mixture of anticipation and dread. She had to know what he had done, how he had defied General Du Bois's orders, and what had become of Lucien and Elsa. The next entry was dated November 11th, 1918, the day of the armistice. Captain Lawrence wrote about the chaos and confusion that had engulfed Paris, the celebrations, the relief, the overwhelming sense of joy that the war was finally over. But amidst the celebrations, he had carried out his secret mission. He had taken Lucien and Elsa, not to the military prison as ordered, but to a secluded farmhouse on the outskirts of the city. It was a place he knew, a place where he had often gone to escape the pressures of his duties, a place where he could be alone with his thoughts. He had provided them with food, clothing, and false identity papers. He had given them money and instructions on how to reach the border, how to escape to Switzerland, a neutral country where they would be safe. "I could not bring myself to kill them," Captain Lawrence wrote. They were innocent, victims of a war they did not choose, a war that had destroyed so many lives. I owed them this chance, this opportunity to escape, to start a new life. He had watched them leave, walking hand in hand towards the forest, towards freedom. He had never seen them again. Isabel felt a wave of relief wash over her. Lucien and Elsa had escaped. They had been given a second chance, a chance to live, to love, to build a future together. Captain Lawrence, despite his loyalty to General Du Bois, had shown compassion, had defied his orders, had risked his own life to save theirs. But the relief was short-lived. The next entry in the diary was dated several weeks later. Captain Lawrence wrote about his growing fear of General Du Bois, his suspicion that the general knew about his betrayal. He described the general's increasingly erratic behavior, his paranoia, his threats. "I fear for my life," Captain Lawrence wrote. "The general suspects me. He knows I disobeyed him. He will not rest until he has silenced me." The final entry in the diary was brief and chilling. "I am being followed," Captain Lawrence wrote. "I know he is coming for me. I have no regrets. I did what was right." The diary ended there. There were no more entries. Captain Lawrence had disappeared, his fate unknown. Isabel closed the diary, her eyes filled with tears. She had found the truth, or at least a part of it. She knew that Lucien and Elsa had escaped, thanks to Captain Lawrence's bravery. But she also knew that Captain Lawrence had likely paid the ultimate price for his actions. She felt a profound sense of sadness, a sense of the injustice that had prevailed. General Du Bois had escaped justice, his crimes unpunished. Captain Lawrence, a hero in his own right, had vanished, his sacrifice forgotten. Isabel felt a renewed sense of determination to tell their story, to honor their memory, to ensure that their sacrifices were not in vain. She left the antique shop with the diary in tow. That evening, as she reviewed it again, she noted a small folded piece of paper stuck between two pages near the end. It was a map, hand-drawn and crude. There was a location marked. And two words, "They are here." Isabel felt a shock. It could not be. Could it? It seemed impossible. It was the location of a small rural church, far to the south. She decided she must visit at once. It was a faint hope, but a hope nevertheless. Chapter 13. The Price of Freedom. The map found within Captain Lawrence's diary was a fragile, almost desperate, glimmer of hope. The crudely drawn lines, the simple notation "they are here," and the marked location of a rural church far to the south of Paris, ignited a firestorm of emotions within Isabelle, a potent mix of anticipation, fear, and a renewed sense of purpose. She decided to travel immediately, taking the first available train. The journey was long and arduous, the landscape outside her window a blur of rolling hills and sleepy villages. The closer she got to her destination, the more intense her emotions became. She clutched the locket, the image of Lucien Fournier, a constant reminder of the man she had come to love, the man whose fate she was determined to uncover. The village near the marked church was small and isolated, a place seemingly untouched by the ravages of war. The church itself was ancient, its stone walls weathered by centuries of wind and rain, its bell tower casting a long shadow over the surrounding fields. Isabelle approached the church with trepidation, her heart pounding in her chest. She pushed open the heavy wooden doors, the creaking sound echoing through the silent interior. The air inside was cool and damp, the scent of incense and old stone filling her nostrils. The church was empty, save for a few flickering candles and a scattering of wooden pews. The stained glass windows cast colorful patterns on the stone floor, illuminating the ancient carvings and faded murals that adorned the walls. Isabelle walked slowly down the aisle, her eyes scanning the interior, searching for any sign, any clue that might connect this place to Lucien and Elsa. She examined the altar, the pulpit, the confessional, but found nothing. Just as she was about to give up, she noticed a small, wooden door tucked away in a corner of the church, near the back. The door was unmarked, unassuming, almost hidden from view. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. She had a feeling, a deep intuition, that this door held the answer, the final piece of the puzzle. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. It led to a small, narrow staircase, winding downwards into darkness. Isabelle hesitated again, a sense of unease creeping over her. But she knew she had to continue. She had come too far, endured too much, to turn back now. She descended the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the confined space. The air grew colder, damper, the scent of earth and decay filling her nostrils. At the bottom of the stairs, she found herself in a small, underground crypt. The crypt was dimly lit by a single flickering candle, casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. There were several tombs lining the walls, their occupants long dead and forgotten. But in the center of the crypt, there was a newer tomb, a simple stone slab adorned with a fresh bouquet of wildflowers. Isabelle approached the tomb, her heart pounding in her chest. She knelt down and examined the inscription, her fingers tracing the letters carved into the stone. Elsa Schmidt-Fournier, she read, her voice barely a whisper. 1895-1919. And beneath Elsa's name, another inscription. Lucien Fournier, she continued, her voice choked with emotion. 1894-1919. Isabelle felt a wave of grief wash over her, a profound sense of loss. They had made it. They had escaped the war. They had found each other. They had married. But their freedom, their happiness had been tragically short-lived. They had died, within the same year, likely from illness. Isabelle sat there for a long time, weeping silently, mourning the loss of two lives, two souls she had never met, but had come to know so intimately. She had found them, but it was too late. Their story had ended, not in a blaze of glory, but in the quiet solitude of a forgotten crypt. The price of their freedom, ultimately, had been their lives, cut short by a world that had been ravaged by war and disease. She placed her hand on the tomb, the cold stone a final, heartbreaking connection to the man she loved and the woman who had shared his final journey. Chapter 14. Whispers in the Catacombs. The discovery of Lucien and Elsa's tomb in the rural church's crypt brought a devastating sense of closure to Isabelle's quest. The heartbreaking reality of their short-lived freedom, their intertwined fates, and their untimely deaths left her reeling with grief. She spent several days in the village, tending to their grave, speaking to the local priest, and piecing together the final chapter of their lives. She learned that Lucien and Elsa had arrived in the village shortly after the armistice, exhausted, ill, but deeply in love. They had been taken in by the priest, who had offered them shelter and care. They had married in the small church, their union a testament to their enduring love amidst the ruins of war. But their happiness had been fleeting. The Spanish flu, a deadly pandemic that swept across the globe in the aftermath of the war, had claimed them both within a few months. Isabel returned to Paris, carrying the weight of their story, the profound sadness of their loss, and the quiet admiration for their courage and resilience. She felt a deep connection to them, a bond forged by her relentless pursuit of their truth, a truth that had proven to be both beautiful and tragic. She decided to visit the Parisian catacombs. The vast network of underground tunnels, lined with the bones of millions of Parisians, felt like an appropriate place to reflect on mortality, on the fleeting nature of life, and on the enduring power of love. As she wandered through the dimly lit tunnels, the silence broken only by the dripping of water and the echoes of her own footsteps, she felt a sense of peace, a sense of connection to the countless souls who had come before her. The catacombs were a reminder that life, even in its darkest moments, was precious, a gift to be cherished and celebrated. She came across a small, secluded alcove where a single candle flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. She sat down, closing her eyes, letting the silence wash over her. She thought of Lucien and Elsa, of their love, their courage, their sacrifice. She thought of Annelise, Renard, Captain Laurent, and General Dubois, the players in a complex and tragic drama that had spanned the war and its aftermath. As she sat there, she heard a faint whisper, a voice carried on the wind, seemingly coming from the depths of the tunnels. It was a woman's voice, soft and melancholic, speaking in French. "Liberté," the voice whispered. "The price of freedom is always high." Isabel's heart skipped a beat. She recognized the voice. It was Annelise. She opened her eyes, looking around the alcove, but she was alone. The voice had been a hallucination, a figment of her imagination, or something more. She stood up, her legs trembling. She walked towards the source of the voice, deeper into the tunnels, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to know. She had to find out if Annelise was still alive, if she had survived the war, if she had somehow escaped the clutches of General Dubois. She followed the voice, her senses on high alert, her mind racing. The tunnels twisted and turned, leading her deeper and deeper into the labyrinthine depths of the catacombs. Finally, she came to a larger chamber, where several tunnels converged. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. And there, standing in the center of the chamber, was a woman. She was elderly, her hair white, her face lined with wrinkles, but her eyes were unmistakable. They were the same dark, haunting eyes that Isabel had seen in the photograph at the Moulin Rouge. It was Annelise. Isabel stared at her, speechless, her mind struggling to comprehend the impossible. Annelise was alive. She had survived. "You found me," Annelise said, her voice soft and raspy. "You found their tomb." It was not a question. Isabel nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I did," she whispered. "I found them." Annelise smiled. A sad, wistful smile. "They were good people," she said. "They deserved better." "What happened?" Isabel asked, her voice trembling. "How did you survive?" Annelise's story began to spill out, a torrent of long-held secrets and whispered truths, in the depths of the Parisian catacombs. It was a story of survival, resilience, and continued danger. Chapter 15. The Artist's Vision. Annelise's voice, frail yet resonant within the echoing chamber of the catacombs, began to weave a tale of survival, resilience, and the enduring weight of secrets. She recounted the events of that fateful night, November 10th, 1918, when General Dubois's men had raided the safe house. Renard was warned, Annalise said, her eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. He knew the general was coming for him. He had arranged for an escape route through the catacombs. She explained that Renard had been using the catacombs for years as a secret network for moving people and information across Paris. He had known the tunnels like the back of his hand, navigating their labyrinthine passages with ease. When the soldiers arrived, Annalise continued, Renard pushed me towards a hidden passage, a narrow opening in the wall that led into the catacombs. He told me to run, to follow the tunnels, to get as far away as possible. She had fled into the darkness, the sounds of gunfire and shouting echoing behind her. She had wandered through the tunnels for hours, lost and terrified, not knowing where she was going or what awaited her. I stumbled upon a group, she said, her voice hesitating. A group of people who lived in the catacombs. They called themselves Les Oubliés, the Forgotten Ones. Les Oubliés were a hidden community, a collection of outcasts, deserters, and refugees who had sought refuge in the depths of the catacombs, escaping the chaos and violence of the war above. They had created their own society, their own rules, their own way of life, hidden from the world. They took me in, Annalise said. They gave me shelter, food, and protection. They taught me how to survive in the tunnels, how to navigate the darkness, how to live among the dead. She had lived with Les Oubliés for years, becoming one of them, adopting their ways, hiding from the world above. She had changed her name, her appearance, her identity, becoming a ghost, a shadow, a whisper in the catacombs. I knew about Lucien and Elsa, Annalise said, her eyes meeting Isabelle's. Renard told me about them. He told me about Captain Laurent's plan to help them escape. He asked me to watch over them, to make sure they were safe. She explained that she had followed Lucien and Elsa from a distance after they had left the farmhouse. She had witnessed their journey, their struggles, their eventual arrival at the rural church. She had seen their marriage, their brief happiness, and their tragic deaths. I couldn't save them, Annalise said, her voice filled with regret. The fluid was too strong. There was nothing I could do. But she had stayed near, watching over their grave, tending to their memory, ensuring that they were not forgotten. Why didn't you come forward? Isabelle asked. Why did you stay hidden? Annalise sighed, a heavy, weary sound. I was afraid, she said. General Dubois was still alive. He had powerful friends. I knew he would never stop looking for me, for anyone who knew the truth. She had lived in fear, constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for the day when the general's men would find her, silence her, bury her secrets forever. But now, Annalise said, her voice gaining strength. Now he is dead. And you have found me. You have uncovered the truth. She smiled, a genuine smile, the first Isabelle had seen from her. You have freed me, she said. You have given me peace. Isabelle felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and admiration. Annalise had survived, against all odds. She had endured unimaginable hardship. She had lived in darkness. She had carried the burden of secrets for years. But she had never given up hope. What will you do now? Isabelle asked. Annalise shrugged. I don't know, she said. I have lived in the shadows for so long, I don't know how to live in the light. She revealed that she had taken up sketching again, in secret, capturing faces in the streets and market. She had rediscovered her passion, her reason. She gestured to the walls of the alcove. Isabelle had not noticed before in the dim light. Sketches covered the stone. Faces, figures, scenes. And two, in particular. Lucien and Elsa. It was her memorial, her way of always remembering. Isabelle looked at the sketches and recognized Lucien's style. He had taught her, in their short time together. Chapter 16. The Forgotten Promise. The revelation of Annalise's survival and her life within the catacombs, alongside her artistic connection to Lucien, brought a new dimension to Isabelle's understanding of the past. The story, once focused on a lost soldier and a mysterious locket, had expanded to encompass a web of interconnected lives, secrets, and betrayals, all woven together by the threads of war and its enduring aftermath. Isabel spent several days with Annalise, listening to her stories, learning about her life with Les Ubleys, and piecing together the final fragments of Lucien and Elsa's journey. Annalise shared her sketches, her memories, and her profound sense of loss, her voice echoing through the silent chambers of the catacombs. Isabel learned that Annalise had maintained contact with Captain Laurent for a short time after he had helped Lucien and Elsa escape. They had met secretly in the catacombs, exchanging information and sharing their fears about General Dubois. He was a good man, Annalise said of Captain Laurent. He risked everything to save them. He knew he was living on borrowed time. Annalise confirmed that Captain Laurent had disappeared shortly after his last entry in the diary. She believed he had been killed by General Dubois's men, his body disposed of, his memory erased. The general was ruthless, Annalise said. He would stop at nothing to protect his secrets. Isabel also learned more about Renard, the double agent. Annalise revealed that Renard had been motivated by a complex mix of idealism, greed, and a deep-seated hatred of General Dubois. Renard believed he was fighting for a better world, Annalise said. But he was also playing a dangerous game. He was using people, manipulating them, sacrificing them for his own cause. Annalise had been one of his victims, caught in his web of deceit, forced to betray her own country, her own conscience. I was young, naive, Annalise said. I believed in him. I believed in his promises. But I learned too late that he was not the man I thought he was. Renard had escaped justice, disappearing after the war, likely with the help of the very people he had betrayed. He had left behind a trail of broken lives and shattered dreams. As Isabel prepared to leave the catacombs, to return to the world above, Annalise gave her a small, folded piece of paper. This is for you, Annalise said. It's a promise. A promise I made to Lucien. Isabel unfolded the paper, her hands trembling. It was a sketch, a portrait of Lucien, drawn by Annalise in the style he had taught her. Beneath the portrait, a single word was written, remember. Isabel felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of grief and gratitude. It was a final gift, a final connection to Lucien, a reminder of his love, his courage, his sacrifice. He asked me to draw him, Annalise explained. He wanted someone to remember him. He knew he might not survive the war. Annalise had kept her promise, preserving Lucien's memory, honoring his spirit, even in the darkness of the catacombs. Isabel left the catacombs, carrying the sketch, carrying Annalise's story, carrying the weight of the past, but also a sense of hope, a sense of closure. She had found the truth. She had uncovered the secrets. She had brought peace to the souls of those who had been lost. She knew that the war had left scars, wounds that would never fully heal. But she also knew that love, courage, and resilience could endure, even in the face of unimaginable adversity. She had learned the value and weight of remembrance. The locket, now almost an afterthought, felt warm in her pocket. She knew she must tell the whole story. But to whom? She felt she might burst. She needed time to gather herself and decide her next course of action. Chapter 17. The Train to Nowhere. The weight of the complete story, the intertwined fates of Lucien, Elsa, Annalise, Captain Laurent, and even the treacherous General Dubois, pressed heavily on Isabel. She had carried the burden of their secrets, their sacrifices, and their enduring love, and she knew she could not keep it to herself any longer. She had to find a way to share their story, to honor their memory, to ensure that their lives were not forgotten. But to whom could she tell it? Who would believe her? Who would care? The war was over. The world had moved on, and the memories of those who had perished were fading into the mists of time. Isabel felt lost, adrift, uncertain of her next step. She wandered through the streets of Paris, the city she had once known so well, now feeling like a stranger in a foreign land. The war had changed everything, had transformed the landscape, the people, the very fabric of society. She found herself at the Gare de l'Est, the train station where she had said goodbye to Jean-Luc, her fiancé, years ago. The station was bustling with activity, people coming and going, their faces a mixture of hope and anxiety. Isabel watched them, feeling a sense of detachment, a sense of being outside the flow of life. She noticed a train on the platform, its destination board reading Verdun. Verdun. The place where Jean-Luc had died, the place where so many young men had lost their lives. Isabelle felt a sudden urge to go there, to revisit the battlefield, to pay her respects to the fallen, to confront her own grief, her own loss. She bought a ticket, almost without thinking, and boarded the train. She found an empty compartment and sat down, staring out the window as the train pulled out of the station, leaving Paris behind. The journey to Verdun was a journey back in time, a journey through the scarred landscape of war. Isabelle saw the trenches, the shell craters, the cemeteries, the memorials, the remnants of a conflict that had shattered the world. As the train approached Verdun, Isabelle felt a growing sense of unease, a sense of dread. She was not sure why she had come, what she hoped to find. She was simply following an impulse, a need to connect with the past, to make sense of the present. When the train arrived at Verdun, Isabelle stepped onto the platform, feeling a chill run down her spine. The station was quiet, almost deserted, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. She walked through the town, the streets lined with rebuilt houses, their newness a stark contrast to the ancient scars of the battlefield. She visited the ossuary, the vast monument containing the bones of thousands of unidentified soldiers, a testament to the scale of the carnage. She wandered through the trenches, the mud clinging to her shoes, the silence broken only by the wind whistling through the barbed wire. She imagined the soldiers, huddled in the darkness, waiting for the next attack, their faces etched with fear and determination. She visited the cemetery where Jean-Luc was buried, his grave marked with a simple wooden cross. She stood there for a long time, her eyes filled with tears, her heart aching with loss. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield, Isabelle felt a sense of emptiness, a sense of the futility of war, the senseless waste of life. She had come to Verdun seeking closure, seeking answers, but she had found only more questions, more grief. She returned to the train station, feeling exhausted, drained, defeated. She boarded the train back to Paris, her mind numb, her heart heavy. As the train pulled out of Verdun, leaving the battlefield behind, Isabelle felt a sudden jolt, a sense of being disconnected from reality. She looked around the compartment, but it was empty. She looked out the window, but the landscape was blurred, indistinct, unrecognizable. She felt a growing sense of panic, a sense of being lost, of being trapped. She didn't know where she was going, or how to get back. The train was going nowhere. It was a train to nowhere. She realized that she had reached a turning point. She had come as far as she could on her own. She felt a profound sense of being utterly lost. Chapter 18. The Field of Poppies. Isabelle's sense of disorientation and panic on the train to nowhere intensified. The landscape outside the window remained a blurred, indistinct mass, the compartment empty and silent, and the feeling of being utterly lost and trapped grew with each passing moment. She tried to stand, to walk, to find someone, anyone, but her legs felt heavy, her movements sluggish, as if she were moving through water. She closed her eyes, trying to calm herself, to think clearly, to find a way out of this surreal, unsettling situation. She focused on her breathing, on the rhythm of her heart, on the feel of the locket in her pocket, the tangible connection to Lucien, to Elsa, to Annalise, to the story she had uncovered. As she calmed herself, the blurred landscape outside the window began to slowly come into focus. She saw fields of vibrant red poppies, swaying gently in the breeze, their petals a splash of color against the muted greens and browns of the countryside. The sight was both beautiful and haunting, the poppies a symbol of remembrance, of sacrifice, of the blood that had been spilled on the battlefields of France. The train, still moving, seemed to be slowing down, gradually coming to a halt. Isabelle looked out the window, her eyes widening in surprise. The train had stopped, not at a station, but in the middle of a field, a vast expanse of poppies stretching as far as the eye could see. She hesitated, unsure of what to do. She felt a strange pull, a compulsion to get off the train, to walk into the field of poppies, to immerse herself in their beauty, in their symbolism. She stood up, her legs still feeling heavy, but her movements less restricted. She walked to the door of the compartment and opened it, stepping out onto the grassy embankment. The air was fresh and clean, the scent of poppies filling her nostrils. She began to walk into the field, the poppies brushing against her legs, their petals soft and delicate. She felt a sense of peace, a sense of serenity, a sense of being connected to something larger than herself. As she walked deeper into the field, she saw a figure in the distance, a woman standing amidst the poppies, her back to Isabel. The woman was wearing a simple white dress, her dark hair flowing in the breeze. Isabel felt a sudden surge of recognition, a sense of familiarity. She knew who it was. She walked towards the woman, her heart pounding in her chest. As she got closer, the woman turned around, her face coming into view. It was Elsa. Isabel stared at her, speechless, her mind struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. Elsa was young, beautiful, her eyes filled with a gentle light, a serene smile on her lips. Isabel, Elsa said, her voice soft and melodious. You have come. Isabel nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I found you, she whispered. I found your story. Elsa smiled again. Thank you, she said. Thank you for remembering. She gestured towards the field of poppies. This is where it all began, she said. And this is where it ends. Isabel looked around, her eyes taking in the vast expanse of red, the beauty, the symbolism, the sense of peace. She understood now. This was not a literal place, a physical location. It was a place of memory, of remembrance, of closure. Elsa reached out and took Isabel's hand, her touch warm and comforting. Come, she said. Let me show you. Elsa led Isabel through the field of poppies, their figures moving gracefully amidst the swaying flowers. As they walked, Elsa began to tell Isabel the story, the complete story, from her perspective. She confirmed all that Isabel had learned and provided all the small details she had missed. And most crucially, how Captain Laurent had ensured their safe passage to the small village. Isabel felt that, after all this time, she had found not an ending, but a form of peace. And she felt, more powerfully, that the act of remembering, of discovering, was a powerful act of love in and of itself. Chapter 19. The Truth Unveiled. Elsa's voice, gentle and ethereal, filled the poppy field with the final, missing pieces of the story. She recounted her experiences during the war, her work at Field Hospital 42, her encounter with Lucien Fournier, and her growing disillusionment with the conflict and its senseless violence. I saw so much suffering, Elsa said, her eyes reflecting the pain of the past. So much death. So much hatred. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't accept it. She described her friendship with Jean-Pierre Dubois, the baker's son, and her growing affection for Lucien. She spoke of their shared dreams, their hopes for a future beyond the war, a future where love and compassion would triumph over hatred and violence. She recounted the events of the Lost Battalion, the brutal fighting, the desperate struggle for survival, and the moment when she had decided to help Lucien and Jean-Pierre escape. I knew it was wrong, Elsa said. I knew I was betraying my country. But I couldn't stand by and watch them die. I had to do something. She explained how she had provided them with medical care, with false identity papers, and with information about a possible escape route. She had risked her own life to save theirs, driven by a sense of humanity, a belief in the power of love and compassion. She confirmed Captain Laurent's role in their escape, his bravery, his compassion, his willingness to defy General Dubois's orders. He was a good man, Elsa said. He believed in justice. He believed in doing what was right, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. She described their journey to the rural church, their marriage, their brief happiness, and their tragic deaths from the Spanish flu. We had so little time, Elsa said, her voice filled with sadness. But we loved each other. We lived each moment to the fullest. We were grateful for every breath, every touch, every smile. As Elsa finished her story, the poppy field began to transform. The red flowers gradually faded, replaced by a soft, golden light, a sense of warmth, a feeling of peace. Isabel felt a profound sense of closure, a sense of understanding, a sense of gratitude. She had found the truth. She had uncovered the secrets. She had honored the memory of those who had been lost. "What now?" Isabel asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elsa smiled. "Now," she said, "it's time for you to live. To live your life. To love. To be happy. To remember us, but to move on." She reached out and touched Isabel's cheek, her touch gentle and reassuring. "You have a gift," she said. "A gift for storytelling. A gift for connecting with the past. Use it. Share our story. Let the world know what happened. Let them know that even in the darkest of times, love can endure." Elsa began to fade, her figure becoming translucent, her voice growing fainter. "Remember us," she whispered, her final words echoing through the golden light. "Always remember." Isabel closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. When she opened them again, she was back on the train, the real train, pulling into the Gare de l'Est in Paris. The journey was over. The vision, the dream, the encounter with Elsa had ended. But the story remained. The truth had been unveiled. And Isabel knew what she had to do. She got off the train and hailed a cab. She gave an address. The offices of Le Monde, the major Parisian newspaper. She felt the weight of responsibility and the power of her task. She would tell the whole story. She had to. Chapter 20. A Love Forged in Fire. Isabel arrived at the offices of Le Monde, her heart pounding with a mixture of determination and trepidation. The bustling newsroom, filled with the clatter of typewriters, the ringing of telephones, and the urgent voices of journalists, was a world away from the quiet solitude of the catacombs and the ethereal beauty of the poppy field. She asked to speak to the editor-in-chief, a man named Monsieur Dubois, no relation to previous individuals of this surname, a seasoned journalist with a reputation for integrity and a keen eye for a compelling story. She was ushered into his office, a cluttered space filled with stacks of newspapers, overflowing bookshelves, and framed photographs of historical events. Monsieur Dubois listened intently as Isabel recounted her story, from the discovery of the locket on the banks of the Seine to her encounters with Anneliese in the catacombs and the vision of Elsa in the poppy field. He asked probing questions, challenged her assumptions, and scrutinized her evidence: the locket, the letters, Captain Laurent's diary, and Anneliese's sketch of Lucien. He was initially skeptical, cautious, aware of the potential for hoaxes and fabrications. But as Isabel continued her narrative, her voice filled with passion and conviction, her eyes reflecting the truth of her experiences, he began to believe her. He saw the genuine emotion, the meticulous research, the undeniable connections between the various pieces of the puzzle. "This is an extraordinary story," Monsieur Dubois said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "A story of love, loss, betrayal, and redemption. A story that needs to be told." He agreed to publish Isabel's story, assigning a team of journalists to help her verify the facts, corroborate her findings, and craft a compelling narrative that would capture the attention of the world. Isabel worked tirelessly with the journalists, sharing her research, her interviews, her insights, her deep understanding of the characters and their motivations. She revisited the Archives Nationales, the military records, the historical societies, confirming every detail, ensuring the accuracy and integrity of the story. The journalists interviewed Anneliese, who, with Isabel's encouragement, had finally emerged from the shadows, ready to share her story with the world. Anneliese's testimony, her first-hand account of the events, added a powerful layer of authenticity and emotional depth to the narrative. The story, titled A Love Forged in Fire, was published in Le Monde on the anniversary of the armistice, November 11, 1920, 1 year after Isabel's initial discovery. It was a sprawling, multi-part series, spanning several issues of the newspaper, capturing the attention of the nation and sparking a renewed interest in the history of the war and its enduring legacy. The story revealed the treachery of General Dubois, the bravery of Captain Laurent, the resilience of Annalise, and the enduring love of Lucien and Elsa. It exposed the secrets, the lies, the betrayals that had been buried for years, bringing justice to the victims and closure to the families who had been left in the dark. The public response was overwhelming. People were moved by the story, captivated by the characters, and shocked by the revelations. The story sparked a national debate about the war, its consequences, and the importance of remembering those who had been lost. Isabelle became an overnight sensation, hailed as a hero, a truth-teller, a voice for the forgotten. She received countless letters, phone calls, and invitations to speak at events, to share her story with the world. She used the newfound leverage to push for a full accounting of the betrayals and a full investigation, this time public, into General Dubois' crimes. But for Isabelle, the most important outcome was the sense of peace, the sense of closure, the sense of having honored the memory of Lucien and Elsa, of having fulfilled her promise to always remember. She had found love, not in the traditional sense, but in the act of uncovering the truth, in the act of connecting with the past, in the act of giving voice to the voiceless. She had found a purpose, a meaning, a reason to live, to love, to remember. She visited Lucien and Elsa's grave, one last time, placing a bouquet of poppies on their tombstone. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow on the village, a similar scene she recalled from her vision. The story had been told, the truth revealed. She was at peace. She had come full circle, not unchanged, but transformed by the lives of those she had brought back into the light. The locket, now a simple memento, felt warm in her hand. Epilogue. Years passed. Isabelle continued to live in Paris, her life forever marked by the story of Lucien, Elsa, and the intricate web of secrets and betrayals she had uncovered. She became a writer, a historian, a chronicler of the forgotten stories of the war, dedicating her life to ensuring that the sacrifices of those who had perished would never be forgotten. The investigation into General Dubois's wartime activities, prompted by Isabelle's revelations and the public outcry, was eventually reopened. Though many of the key players were long dead, the official record was amended, acknowledging the general's treachery and the injustice suffered by those he had betrayed. Captain Laurent's name was cleared, his bravery and compassion officially recognized, his sacrifice honored. Annalise, no longer living in the shadows, became a celebrated artist, her sketches and paintings capturing the beauty and resilience of the human spirit. She and Isabelle remained close friends, their bond forged by the shared experience of uncovering the truth and bringing closure to a long-buried story. Annalise's art often featured subtle nods to the past, a hidden poppy, a fleeting image of a soldier's silhouette, a testament to the enduring power of memory. Isabelle never married, but she found love and companionship in her work, in her friendships, and in the countless stories she uncovered, each one a reminder of the enduring power of the human spirit to persevere, to love, and to remember. She often visited the Seine, sitting on the same bench where she had found the locket, the silver now polished and shining, a tangible link to the past. She would often think about the ripple effect of her actions, the way that a single discovery, a single act of curiosity, had led to a cascade of revelations, transforming her life and the lives of so many others. She realized that the past was never truly gone, that it lived on in the memories, the stories, the artifacts that remained, waiting to be discovered, waiting to be shared. On the anniversary of the armistice, she would always visit Lucien and Elsa's grave, placing a bouquet of poppies on their tombstone, a silent tribute to their love, their courage, and their sacrifice. She would whisper a prayer, a promise to always remember, a vow to continue their story, to keep their memory alive. And as she stood there, in the quiet solitude of the rural churchyard, she felt a sense of peace, a sense of gratitude, a sense of connection to the past, to the present, and to the future. She had found her purpose, her meaning, her love, in the act of remembering, in the act of storytelling, in the act of honoring the lives of those who had been lost, but were no longer forgotten. The world, healed in small increments, was better for it. The act of remembrance, she had learned, was its own powerful, enduring form of love.